Hello everyone, RFG here with a review for Liuyin's World, an action RPG that focuses on aggressive and counter-defense combat with fairly expansive areas to explore. Developed and published by kingnagame, available on Steam, and is the final entry in the Liuyin Trilogy. While the first two games followed a mostly linear but open branching story and stage path design, World broadens the scope of becoming more Metroidvania-like in its exploration and having some larger encompassing zones. There are some additions that I'll get into later, but for the most part, Liuyin's World builds upon the accessible ARPG mechanics established in both of its previous entries, and though they take place in a more traditional fantasy setting, World moves into the distant future with cyber fantasy. Beginning with the protagonist landing from a portal into an unknown area, you'll soon be battling your way through a futuristic cityscape. While he starts off with no real understanding of why he's here or why he's been attacked, you'll eventually meet a guide who says that she was instructed to assist you on your journey as you recover your memory and abilities. Most of the abilities you'll regain are battle-related, and though Liuyin's World can be fairly split between the time you spend exploring and the time you spend battling enemies, the combat fundamentals do have a bit more ins and outs to explain. Your core combat mechanics push you to remain aggressive when in a fight, with a number of offensive abilities at your disposal. Your main attack state reflects this by functioning essentially as a continuous never-ending melee attack string that can whittle down an enemy's health. Nearby enemies within a certain distance or when they're attacked will usually initiate lock-on, and if they're defeated, you'll be automatically locked on to the next enemy, continuing attacking your new target. Lock-on can be manually switched on or off, and you can freely change targets if more than one is near. Melee attacks are a core part of the combat, but you do also have a soul gun to use on enemies from a distance while aiming. Bullets from the soul gun need time to replenish after use, but you can shoot 3 times in quick succession at full stock. You have access to one type of bullet in the beginning of the game, but you can unlock other types of ammo for the soul gun while exploring, with each having their own effects when charged. You can charge your shots by holding down the fire button while aiming. Enemies aren't completely vulnerable to your attacks. Underneath their health is their posture/guard gauge, which lets them defend against your attacks and allows them to counterattack you as long as they have guard meter. If an enemy does try to counter you, you can try to keep your offensive to force them back to guarding, avoid them by dodging, which requires stamina that you can see at the top left of the screen underneath your health bar, or use defend to parry/deflect their attacks. Your stamina can also be used for kung fu skills, though by default you'll instead have a healing skill already assigned for use that doesn't use stamina. Its supply is limited but can be restocked. You will gain access to another skill at the beginning of a playthrough that does use stamina, but you'll also be able to earn more throughout the game. You can assign up to 4 kung fu skills to use through the menu. Different kung fu skills can use more or less stamina, but are more effective at dealing damage against enemy health and guard meters than your standard attacks. Your skills won't be usable without the minimum required stamina needed for them. Defend is another ability that can assist in breaking an enemy's guard, as successful instant defenses will deal guard damage and leaves you able to react with their own counter-offensive. Enemies have their own skills and will emit a white flash or spiritual chi fluctuation when using one to attack, but allows you time to react with the well-timed dodge or instant defend and your own counter. Some enemies also have a higher level skill attack that shows a green opening warning called burst seams, but dashing into the enemy when this prompt appears unleashes your own counter that deals heavy guard damage. Knocking an enemy's guard gauge down to 0 leaves them vulnerable to a fatal attack, and if multiple enemies near each other have empty guard bars, they can be taken out simultaneously. Perception skills round out your offensive abilities. These skills require perception points to use, with different skills requiring more points. You can gain perception points by building up the meter in the orb next to your health with successful attacks, instant defense, and perfect dodges. You'll begin with a limit of 1 perception point to gain and use, but you'll be able to increase your maximum amount after certain conditions are met. You can assign up to 5 perception skills to use from the menu. Unlike your kung fu skills, you must activate these while in the perception state. Time will slow down while in this state to allow you to choose your desired skill, and though you are vulnerable while in the perception state, most of your perception skills will provide you with invincibility during their animation. Most regular enemies will be attacking in groups, so juggling when to use kung fu, perception skills, or reacting defensively can vary on enemy numbers and types, but boss encounters are one-on-one battles that bring on other challenges. Boss enemies apply all of the types of attacks and skills that other enemies have, on top of their own red assault warning skill that must be avoided or you will take damage. Bosses have their health and guard gauges shown at the bottom of the screen, and unlike other enemies, breaking their guard leaves them vulnerable to a critical attack rather than a fatal one. Besides being their own challenges, bosses serve as main points of progression, not just for the story, but also for building up the protagonist's abilities. Defeating bosses earns you the most worthwhile of rewards, usually in the forms of a key item, soul fragments, and EXP. EXP is one of the main forms of currency in Liuyin's world. You can gain it from exploring the environment and defeating enemies, but there's a large difference in the amount you earn as a boss reward. Soul fragments are the other form of currency, but unlike EXP, you won't get any from regular enemies, though you can find spare amounts of them through exploration. Key items from bosses can be a mix of items needed for story progression and or necessary for purchasing either new skills or spirit menu upgrades for the protagonist. You can view your key items in the menu, and in some cases it might give you a hint to what their purpose is. EXP can be spent in the spirit menu to upgrade the protagonist's stats and or skills. There are 4 separate types of sets to choose from. Each set has 3 levels of upgrades with 3 different increases for stats or a skill. These can be upgraded in any order, but some will require you to have acquired a particular item before you can proceed with the upgrade. Soul fragments must be spent along with EXP to buy new Kung Fu and perception skills. Skills become available to purchase after you acquire the necessary items, but unlike EXP and soul fragments, the item itself will not be spent after purchasing a skill. Unlike spirit upgrades, you can't purchase skills from the menu. Instead, you buy them from Youchan, the guide who you'll meet shortly after the introductory section of the game. She'll occasionally pop up here and there to provide you with information, but soon after meeting her, she'll be located in the shelter, the game's hub-esque location. You'll first need to reach this area through an elevator, but it'll become much easier to access with the transmission option at the many save points you can find scattered throughout the game. Activating these marks them as transmission points for fast travel and has other functions. Recuperating at a save point restores your health, restocks your healing skill usage, and saves your progress. There are some auto-save points near key areas, though I'd advise to rest at save points just in case you are worried about losing progress, but this will also respawn normal enemies in a zone. Unlocked soul gun ammo types can be swapped here too, along with any weapons or mantles you've unlocked. None of the equipment, as far as I can tell, directly affect your stats, but different weapons can have alternate attack styles, while both your mantle and weapons can have other effects. Fast travel is probably the most important feature of save points. Environments in Liuyin's world can feel pretty big, and are basically separated into fairly large zones, but save points often feel a place to make them the most convenient way to travel between the locations in them. Part of this is because the protagonist himself is limited in his ability to traverse areas, so relying on the design of the environment and the travel points within is how you'll explore them. The other part is that the way the game's zones and alternate paths are laid out has an emphasis on when bosses are confronted, where defeating one boss before another can lead to different outcomes. That doesn't mean there aren't ones that are optional or mandatory, but it does make the game's progression more dependent on how to route boss enemies, and this couples with the game's zone exploration. Much of your time exploring the zones in Liuyin's world will be spent looking for on-screen prompts to interact with objects or characters while navigating through maze-like areas, with some light platforming, and finding shortcuts to make pathways between locations. Most environmental interactions can be opening doors to pass through, using elevators, activating switches, or collecting items from a chest. Sometimes doors and chests may be locked, or a new area may have a barrier in place, but in these situations the prompt may have a hint placed in there for what you need or why something is inaccessible. If you are looking for an item needed for progression or a switch to interact with, you can usually find them located within the zone of their locked counterparts, along with other items that can be picked up directly in the environment. The various zones will also have characters you'll come across, and similar to Youchan, will usually give you information about the area you're in that might help you proceed, but others may provide you a clue on something nearby. Clues can function as parts of side quests or mini quests with their own rewards. Any clues you have pending or completed can be seen in the menu. Using the combination of clues and hints from characters through the exploration of zones to determine when to fight a boss is key to progression through the alternate boss routes of Liuyin's world. For those who haven't played Nine Treasures or Redemption of Liuyin, Liuyin's world offers fast-paced combat that can be challenging, but gives the option to gradually grow your character with upgrades and has variety for playstyles with skills and equipment options. That variety is consistent with the boss encounters you come across, as each boss is fairly unique. Regular enemy designs are fairly diverse by zone, but some areas within may seem less mixed than others when it comes to enemy types, but is still varied fairly enough considering the length of a playthrough. Environment layouts fit the Metroidvania mode fairly well, and mix with areas that can be spacious or more compact. Most of the areas will usually have something that stands out which helps with navigating between them, but tighter space areas do feel a bit drab, even though it does match the futuristic story setting and theming. The story is probably one of the trickier things to comment on. It wasn't the strongest aspect for either of the previous games, but Liuyin's world does have direct references to both, though I think it does a better job presenting its story compared to them. It does have a share of translationisms, translations that are awkward but do make sense in context, yet also have a certain charm to them. Nevertheless, its story is generally interesting overall, but can feel like it's lacking punch in its presentation, though it does provide fitting endings for the series. If you are interested in the previous games, Nine Treasures and Redemption of Liuyin are virtually identical to each other, with the main differences being the camera perspective, some of the controls, and certain parts of the level design. But the overall content and story is pretty much the same, though I'd recommend playing Redemption over Nine Treasures since it's more similar in playstyle to Liuyin's world. I would also recommend to play either 2 before Liuyin's world, although not necessarily to understand world story better. Liuyin's world, despite being a sequel to the previous games and definitely feeling like an overall improvement, also feels a bit like a refinement of both of its predecessors' initial game designs and concepts. It reuses many of the bosses and enemies, in some ways conceptually, of the previous games, and although it makes sense story-wise, it should be very noticeable for those who've played Nine Treasures or Redemption. A lot of the music is also reused, but there are new tracks in the game. Many of them can be collected while exploring the environment like its predecessors, and most of the music remains solid, although sound effects still feel a bit lacking in cutscenes like its previous entries. Regardless of the amount of content or concepts being reused, the improvement from the previous games is noticeable, not just from the change in setting and the jump in graphics, but also from some game design aspects. The soul gun is notable since it has other uses compared to the flying daggers from the previous entries, and has a perception skill linked to it to make it more useful in combat. The translation feels better, making progression more understandable, and the levels being expanded in size isn't just superficial. In general, environments feel like one of the biggest improvements. Some of the different zones do share the conceptual background of the previous games, but as far as I can tell, their layouts share little to no similarities, and the removal of the rope dart from its predecessors gives a more seamless structure to how you navigate through them. Unlockable weapons and mantles add to the improvements, and the fact that these can offer different attack styles and or effects, instead of offering simple stat increases, ends up making obtaining them feel more rewarding and like an evolution for the trilogy. There are some small things missing from its predecessors, like the character portraits for dialogue and the option to refight bosses, both of which were added in later updates, but they aren't too impactful in comparison to what World improves on. Whether you're new to the series or not, Liuyin's world's difficulty is fairly balanced, and because of how EXP is gained mostly from boss encounters and exploration, makes grinding for it unnecessary due to the low amount of EXP gained from defeating normal enemies. The game also keeps a reasonable pace, and no run should feel too long as it's meant to be played multiple times since you won't be able to collect all items, defeat all bosses, or view all endings in a single playthrough, so there is a bit of experimentation involved in when you decide to explore an area or defeat boss enemies. But because you'll be able to carry over your skills, spirit upgrades, soul gun bullet types, equipment, unused EXP, and soul fragments to each playthrough, that should help you cut down your time as you try to find new bosses and items. Not to mention that you'll no longer be required to go through the intro section. Items, on the other hand, whether they're for progression, needed for purchasing a spirit upgrade or a skill, aren't kept in your inventory and must be earned again. Clues also don't carry over, regardless if they were completed or not, which works with Liuyin's world's overall length and replayability structure. If you are a fan of either Nine Treasures or Redemption of Liuyin, Liuyin's world is a worthwhile end for the trilogy. Not only was it satisfying to see the series get refined as much as it did in a short amount of time for its final part, but it genuinely feels like an overall improvement. While the reuse of many of the bosses, enemies, and overall concepts is a valid criticism for those who played either or both of the previous games, the way most things have been improved and the new additions does make me feel like Liuyin's world is worth playing, not just to finish the story, but to see the refinement in design. If you're unfamiliar with the previous games but are looking for an ARPG and aren't necessarily looking for something that's too complex, Liuyin's world might be a good match for you. It could use a bit more polish and does have some small issues here and there, but it provides that balance of being a fun, tightly packed, challenging enough action RPG experience and does it with a decent amount of replayability through routing experimentation. If you are interested in Liuyin's world or the other 2 games in the series, I recommend checking out the Steam store pages to see if any of the 3 parts are a fit for you. As for me, the increased refinement in each game of the Liuyin Trilogy has me looking forward to what kingnagame will be working on next. And that's it for me. Let me know what you think below. Thanks. Bye.